For more than 70 years, Saudi Arabia has been Britain and the West's key ally in the Arab world. The government says they've kept us safe by sharing intelligence and helping us fight terrorism and foil attacks.
Very, very nice to see.
Since David Cameron's government came to power, we've sold Saudi Arabia more than £5 billion of weapons.
Saudi Arabia has been a very important partner. We've got our oil from them, we've sold weapons technology to them, and they have been an ally in providing intelligence about low-level al-Qaeda activities. But there's an irony there, and that is because actually al-Qaeda stems from an extreme interpretation of Wahhabi Salafism, which is the official religion of Saudi Arabia, and which they've been spreading around the world since 1979. So there's an ambivalence to that relationship.
The Saudis have spent at least $70 billion spreading Wahhabi Islam around the world. But they've always denied any official link to terrorism, and are now preparing to send troops in to fight against ISIS in Syria. But evidence has come to light related to the most high-profile terror attack of all. 15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were Saudi citizens. Osama bin Laden himself came from a prominent Saudi family. It prompted the United States to investigate Saudi links to terrorist organizations.
There were individuals within the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, some of them prominent citizens, some of them people with ties to the royal family, who were funneling funds to all kinds of activities. We saw tremendous amounts of money were going to promote a Wahhabi variation of Sunni Islam. And that led to, I think, mostly unintended consequences, but they should have been recognizable consequences.
According to US government documents we've obtained, a pattern emerged of Islamic charities supporting terrorism. The CIA reported that governments in the Islamic world had supported the charities' religious activities, but were unable to monitor them or how their money was used. The name of one charity came up repeatedly: the Saudi High Commission for Bosnia and Herzegovina. It was set up in Sarajevo by Saudi Arabia and provided more than £300 million in aid for Bosnian Muslims.
The Saudi High Commission was a significant state-funded charity, and it was tied in certain instances to financing terrorism, in particular in Bosnia, for example. There were people within this institution who were funneling funds to terrorist groups at the time.
But more than allegations of passing on money, we found evidence the Saudi High Commission was providing employment and cover for terrorists. Inside this New York courthouse are boxes of evidence for a case brought by the families of 9/11 victims against the Saudi government and the Saudi High Commission. The families are currently appealing their case after it was dismissed last year on the grounds of sovereign immunity. Among the material is this tape, recorded testimony from a convicted Al-Qaeda terrorist. It's never before been broadcast. This is Ali Hamad, a jihadi who fought with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and Bosnia. He alleges he and others were employed by the Saudi High Commission, and that local officials at the charity knew that he was linked to Al-Qaeda. He says Bosnia was seen as a crucial foothold in Europe for Al-Qaeda to plan future attacks. Hamad was later involved in setting off a car bomb in Bosnia in 1997 after the war had ended. It was apparently designed to kill non-Muslims and reignite the fighting there. Documents obtained by lawyers for the 9/11 families also reveal Washington knew about the charity's direct links to terror. But it was only after 9/11 that action was taken.
NATO's heightened state of security.
2 weeks after the 9/11 attacks, NATO special forces raided the charity's offices in Sarajevo.
Are you saying that you have evidence of Al-Qaeda's activities here in Bosnia?
Yes.
We've spoken to another senior officer involved in the raid, who described the material they uncovered as very disturbing. A hard drive of maps of military buildings in Washington, information on how to fake State Department badges, and before and after pictures of the World Trade Center.
The scope of the evidence, the number of people with terrorist connections who were affiliated with this organization, the amount of money that flowed out of it undermines the notion that it was a purely legitimate humanitarian organization. There was certainly something else going on.
Documents filed in court confirm that the Saudi High Commission was an official arm of its government which provided a third of its funding, and that the charity's president throughout this period was a man whose face now hangs over the streets of Riyadh. At the time, Prince, now King Salman. And Saudi media reported he visited its offices in Sarajevo a year before it was raided.
The Saudi High Commission was linked to radical individuals who, in several different instances, were allegedly involved with Al-Qaeda. That suggests to me a questionable sense of judgment about what the drivers of terrorism are or historically have been. King Salman could or should have done a better job in exerting oversight over the organizations in which he was chair.
The Saudi government in the past has said that none of its agencies knowingly provided funds to Al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups. There is no suggestion King Salman, the royal family, or senior Saudi officials knew about or were involved in the alleged support for terrorism at the Saudi High Commission. The 9/11 Commission said that although Saudi Arabia had long been considered the primary source of Al-Qaeda funding, it had found no evidence that the Saudi government or senior officials individually funded Al-Qaeda, but that this did not exclude the likelihood that charities with significant Saudi government sponsorship diverted funds to Al-Qaeda. Since 9/11, Saudi Arabia has wanted to show the world that they are tackling terrorism. They themselves have been the target of attacks, and they have passed laws to clamp down on private donations from inside the kingdom. They have carried out airstrikes against ISIS, and are now preparing for a ground war against them in Syria. They also deny Saudi Arabia supports ISIS ideologically. But many feel that it's the underlying Wahhabi ideology that's the wider problem.
The ideology of ISIS is not much different from the ideology that Wahhabi Salafi Islam in Saudi Arabia adheres to. Unless the Saudis deal with this issue, we are going to constantly fight yesterday's war, and even if we defeat ISIS, there'll be another terrorist organization, perhaps with a different name, as long as they have this ideology that emanates from Saudi Arabia.
I think our national interest needs to take into account the very real threat that the ideology that comes from there is posing to us, and we see this in Daesh, we see it in ISIS, we see it in our domestic terrorism. And so I think that morally we need to make a stand. I think that the chickens are coming home to roost on this one.
King Salman's government says it's leading a crackdown on terrorism at home as well as abroad. They've led a coalition against an uprising by a Shia militia in neighbouring Yemen, using British and American weaponry in a widespread bombing campaign. And on the 2nd of January 2016, they announced the execution of 47 men for terrorist offences in Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia says it has executed 47 people.
It was the largest mass execution since 1980.
Shia cleric Nimr al-Nimr.
Whilst many were convicted Al-Qaeda terrorists, several others were political activists. In response to the film, the Foreign Office told us,
"Only by working with Saudi Arabia can we bring about changes we would like to see. We regularly raise with them the importance of compliance with international law, including in the Yemen conflict. Senior Saudi leaders have condemned sectarianism and ISIS's ideology. Our police training undergoes strict assessment and is designed to improve human rights compliance of the Saudi justice system. Our arms sales are subject to one of the most robust export control regimes in the world. We are extremely concerned about Raif Badawi and have raised his case at very senior levels. The Saudi government has assured us that Ali Nimr will not be executed.
The Saudi government told us.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia utterly rejects the partisan nature and sensationalist tone of this documentary, which sets out to portray the country in a negative and unbalanced light. The Kingdom's legal system is based on the due process of Islamic Sharia law. The Kingdom is at the forefront of international efforts to combat terrorism and will pursue anyone who supports and funds terrorist activity, and to suggest otherwise is a slur. In keeping with its biased agenda, ITV chose to undertake covert filming when they could have applied for and received a journalistic visa, like many of their counterparts.
Activists say they're being forced underground, but with the spread of phones and cameras, it has become impossible for the regime to control what the world sees.